Good evening, and welcome to Oregon Humanities Consider This. Thanks for piping in online. And before I do anything else, I want to say a big, rainy welcome to Mitchell S. Jackson. Mitchell, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Uh, it's funny to welcome you to Portland from Portland while you're in Arizona, because I think actually you probably ought to be welcoming me to Portland in some way. Uh,
Yeah,
So let's do this.
yeah.
We're gonna jump into conversation for about an hour in about 2 minutes. And I should say before we jump in, this is the first uh, evening on a new theme for the year. The theme is American Dreams, American Myths, American Hopes. And that's a theme we're going to be exploring through our Consider This series all year. And that series is possible thanks to support from the National Endowment for the Humanities and even a little part of an initiative that they're supporting in all the states and territories called A More Perfect Union. And then the Oregon Cultural Trust, Northwest Natural, Tonkin Torp, Stoll Reeves, and the Kinsman Foundation. I want to say thanks to all of those organizations for helping make this event possible. I also want to thank a lot of individuals who participate in Oregon humanities programs and support work here and around the state. And I should say that after we talk for an hour, just want to invite everyone that's on here to join via the link that's on the bottom of your page, and we'll put at the end so that you can talk to each other in small groups about the stuff that Mitchell is getting us thinking about. And that conversation will be facilitated by my colleague at Oregon Humanities, Roselle Medina. So that was a little bit of preamble. So Mitchell, you have been writing fiction and nonfiction, book length and long form and short form, about all sorts of topics that relate to, bear on, and illustrate, I think, that big theme: American dreams, American myths, American hopes. And I wonder if we could start by going back to Residue years, your
Okay.
2013 novel, where, yeah, right, going back.
Yeah.
And specifically, like, there's a moment where Champ and Grace, so Champ and his mom,
Hmm.
are talking about getting back the home that they once lived in on 6th and Mason
Yeah.
and describe it as our own slice of the American dream.
Yeah.
And maybe just for starters, I want to ask, like, how did that home come to occupy that position for Champ and his mom?
Okay. I'm glad you asked about that home because it's an actual home. I won't hand out any addresses for someone to go by there, but it was the home of my great grandmother, Edith Jackson. And for me, it was a touchstone because she and my grandfather, who lived nearby, owned homes for really all of my life. So from the time I was born until they passed, they owned those homes, and so we were a little nomadic or itinerant in our living sometimes. But I always knew that I could go back to Sixth and Mason, and some of my fondest memories are there. She was a religious woman. She was from the deep South. She was from Alabama. She would gather up all the kids, cousins, uncles, and make us read Bible verses. And she would set us outside and let us pick plums from the tree. It was just a great, great time. And also, the house was the biggest house on the block as well. So I think, um, even though it was tacitly, it was a source of pride to be living in the big white house on the corner. Uh, I she was one of the few people that owned a home in the family, so it was really important to me, and a source of pride.
Mhm. So, source of pride, and first of all, there's something about that image of the plums too that just like lands
Yeah.
hard. Um, but why take the step from source of pride, place with good
Hmm.
memories, to saying our slice of the American dream? how would owning that home mean, there we go, we got a slice of that thing?
Yeah. Well, I think it was also in thinking about what happened. Um, I don't, must have been the early 2000s, maybe the late 1990s, possibly late 1980s, when the neighborhood was changing, right? I can remember white men in suits walking around asking people if they wanted to sell their homes. And or they were doing other things too, selling aluminum siding for your house and filters for the water. But it soon enough they came around asking if people wanted to sell their homes. And so, uh, we're taught that the American dream is a home and two kids and a picket fence and a home. And so I believed in that because that's what I was taught. And to have a member of my family have that part of the American dream when other members didn't have it, it really seemed important to me. And then, when I got old and I realized I didn't have the name gentrification to apply to it, but I did realize that people that didn't look like the people that were occupying the community were coming in and displacing people. Um, that was a problem. And so, uh, if the American dream is what they tell us, then we all should own a home.
So if the American dream is what they tell us, then we all should own a home.
Yeah,
So
that's what they
of
say,
course I'm
right?
curious. I mean, the they is interesting. Like, is there a clear, in a way, you're a storyteller, in a way.
Yeah.
So you're one of the people that tells us stories about the world we live in.
Hmm.
If the American dream is what they tell us, we all should own a home. Is the American dream what they tell us?
Oh, no. Absolutely not. Um, but it sounds good and it creates aspirations. I guess it
Hmm.
also creates a lot of disappointment. And I think it's a part of, I mean, how do we create, like, we think about like real estate, yeah, it's a sound investment for you. But if we think about how real estate is valued, right, and with like what home, like a home in a depressed neighborhood, which if it's depressed, someone depressed it, is worth X amount of dollars versus if you take that same structure and put it elsewhere in a neighborhood of affluence and it's worth a different amount of money. And so, when I got to thinking about, I know I'm jumping ahead about survival math and thinking about the ways in which Northeast Portland was created and the values of homes and who was able to own them and who wasn't. Yeah, you really start to see how um, phantasmagoric the American dream is for most of the people and people that look like me.
So it's funny you said you're jumping ahead because in my head I'm also jumping ahead because there's so much in what you're saying now. And and one of the things in survival math, I think, as you said, it's all over. That book is like how phantasmagoric this idea of an American dream may be and who has access to it. Before we
Yeah.
go too much into that, can I want, just because there's the moment in your piece about Ahmaud Arbery
Hmm.
where you describe what he's doing before before essentially he's chased and then
Yeah.
murdered. And what you describe what he's doing is he's looking at a house.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you see there? What's going on there?
It's strange. I actually did an interview today about that, and one of the things that I hadn't even put this together in my head previous, but um, he had this dream of finding land and building homes on that land for him and his friends, and then raising their families together. And I imagine that a person who held that as an aspiration would be really interested in home construction, if not just for like how do you actually do this thing, but just to be around something that would inspire you or that reflected the dreams that you had. So to me, he was inside of that home, encouraging himself, right? Like showing himself that these things were possible, which also obviously makes what happened to him after even that much more tragic. But yeah, I think we're told the same things about the American dream. We, meaning people of color, Black people, people who've been disenfranchised. We're sold the same story. If we're talking about storytelling, we're sold the same story, and then we are actively denied the means of realizing that story. Right. So no one tells you about redlining when they say go get a house.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's why I guess Six and Mason thinking about Northeast Portland, thinking about
Yeah.
Maud Arbery. Uh, here's this dream. Look at the risks that come with your taking that dream seriously.
Yeah. Yeah.
That said, you described yourself in survival math as a dreaming dreamer,
Hmm.
uh, and you in residue years in survival math and everything I've read of yours, the
Mm-hmm.
dream is so alive,
Mm-hmm.
explicitly and implicitly. So can I like, uh, w- given the risks of the dream or of dreaming,
Mm-hmm.
why do you think that for you seems like such a palpable part of who you are?
Um, I mean, I think, uh, I mean, there's, I mean, I kind of see it as like there's two options, right? You can give up, or you can, um, for lack of a better term, make something of yourself. And
Mhm.
I, to realize the life that I have now had to involve dreaming because I didn't recognize it was not something that was presented to me as a possibility. I never saw an
Mm.
author in my school. Maybe they came to visit. I don't remember a visit. I didn't go to readings. I did not own a bookshelf in my house where I was picking, books off the shelf. No one was reading to me at bedtime. All of the kind of markers of my peers the stories that I hear them tell about why they love words and books and sentences and why they wanted to be a writer, and even the kind of life that you can obtain from writing, like, being a professor or whatever else it is, that just wasn't a possibility for me. But I also knew that um, I did not want to let the circumstances dictate
Mm.
a life for me that felt um, really anonymous. I guess is probably the best. Like, I didn't want to live anonymous, and so while I didn't have like a specific dream when I was young, I knew that I wanted to uh, to matter.
Mm. There's so much in here to matter, and you also said you didn't want to remain anonymous. And I guess there are two questions that I have in my head, and the first is about whether you think, given what you said earlier, maybe let's just sit with this one for a little bit. Does
Hmm.
is there like one American dream that we should think about, no matter where we come from, no matter what color we are, no matter what gender we are, or would it be more helpful to go, no, let's parse this out a little bit.
Yeah,
Like what's the use of one kind of general, um, differently applied but common American dream? Is that a useful thing to hold up in front of ourselves?
I don't think it's useful to hold up in front of ourselves. I think the purpose of a singular American dream is a master narrative, right? It's the way that white people tell themselves we are the best. They make the metrics, and then they judge how well they've achieved the metrics, and then everyone else is judged by those same metrics, no matter what kind of access they have to achieving them. So yeah, I think it serves a purpose, right? It makes us homogeneous, and that is to uh, homogeneous population serves the people who pull the strings. Not to be conspiracy theorists about this, but I think when I think about conventions and master narratives, I'm like, well, who are they benefiting? and oftentimes they don't benefit people that look like me.
Mhm. And I mean, in this case, if the like if we take Champ seriously, which
Hmm.
it's hard not to reading that book, then the dream is to buy a home, which feels like an individualized dream. Like there's something about that story that kind of inscribes this idea that each of us is out for our own, most of all.
Yeah, yeah. But I also think his dream is about rootedness. It's about a
Mm,
sense of belonging, right? Like if you think about Toni Morrison's definition of home, it's the stories and the people that are familiar to us. And so I think what Champ really wanted was to feel rooted in the community, was not to feel like he could be easily displaced by someone else. And also I think it's a marker of, if we're thinking about, he's 20 something years old, like a marker of manhood to be a provider for his family. So there's all these kind of identity um, issues wrapped up in this, in his dream to buy a home.
all right. Well, you just said the word manhood, which makes me we got to go deeper into survival math because it feels like there's in a way that's what that book a lot of it feels like is an attempt to
Yeah.
understand like what are stories about what it means to be a man.
Hmm.
And some of that's tough stuff. Like I want to commend you here for being game to write some of the stuff
Yeah.
that's in there because it's tough stuff in a book of nonfiction. Um,
Hmm.
do you feel like there's? I think I want to ask like I guess in that book you kind of establish a composite father figure or male figure.
Yeah.
Um, what could you boil down? Is it possible to boil down what you think the sort of story of what manhood is based on what you the people you talk to in survival myth, or is that an unrealistic question to ask?
um no, I think it's realistic. I was just rereading a little bit of Frantz Fanon, Black Skin, White Mask, and he has that line that I had highlighted. What is it? The black man wants to be white, and the white man desperately wants to achieve the rank of man. And I think that when we think about manhood, again, we all have similar metrics because we've been indoctrinated to think of manhood in a certain way, that you can provide, that you can um, safeguard your loved ones, that you have some standing in the world. And then what happens when you can't provide, or you can't keep your people safe, or
Mm,
your standing in the world is diminished. And so really, I think manhood, or if we're really talking specifically about black manhood, it's
mhm,
it's the dissonance between those standards that everyone kind of has accepted, or many have accepted, and the actual possibilities of what we can achieve. And which makes me think that's why the idea of respect, right? Something that's intangible, but the idea of respect is so integral um, to black manhood.
so respect standing related to what you said before about anonymity. um, you talked before about not having examples of writers in front of you
Yeah.
when you went to school, and the men that you interview and portray in survival math are some of them are doing you know some tough stuff. They're we're t-
Hmm.
and by tough stuff I mean uh, so engaged in various things that are considered criminal, whether
Yeah.
it's selling drugs, in some cases prostitution. Um, there's violence that threatens to catch you on either side that you write about that
Hmm.
you don't know how you sort of came out of it without either killing or being killed.
Hmm.
Like, how do you understand that as we talk right now, you're in Arizona? writing professor.
Yeah.
Given the stories, uh, how how that happened?
Um, well, I think before I figured it out, I had figured out some things about myself. One, I don't think I ever had. I didn't. It was hard to make me feel affronted, right? So my sense of respect was, I think, a little more malleable than a lot of my peers. Um, and so that would govern the kind of reactions I would have, or the way that I would deal with situations of conflict where manhood became an aspect that was in question. I also am fortunate that I had people when I was very young. I can remember my third grade teacher, Miss Peterson, um, telling me that I was smart, and it's a small thing, but actually here I am, 46 years old, recalling when Miss Peterson called me smart in third grade at King's School. So it did have an effect on me, and I held on to that as part of my identity. Right, I didn't let go of that in sixth grade, like some people, like, oh, well, school is not cool anymore. There was never a point in my life when I thought school was uncool. I was also
Hmm.
very fortunate when I got into my teens to have a group of men around me, some of whom I just wrote about in a story, who all were athletes, and our identity became that of athletes versus other identities that we could have assumed. And even if some of us were on the periphery of, you know, gang membership, or dabbling in street stuff, we all were also basketball players. And the thing about it is, the community was so small that people would refer you by the identity that they knew you by, right? So they would say, "Oh,
Hmm.
they're gonna Mitch, he's a hooper." Right? And so at a certain point, and I started to take pride in that. They could be like, "Oh, there go Mitch, he's a Crip," and I would have had a lot less pride in that. But then
Hmm.
some men, or some young men, start to take a pride in that as an identity, right? And once that becomes your identity, well, there's a lot of places you got to take it to become the
Hmm.
best of that.
And you're referring to the piece that was in the New York Times Magazine, the Vegas
Yeah.
piece,
Yes.
which again it's another heavy, beautiful piece, and it feels like that too is about both dreams and especially about connection between men, like building
Yeah.
community and building identity.
Yeah.
Um,
Definitely.
and I should say, for reasons, I just passed through Las Vegas last night and this morning. I was coming back from Utah, and all
Oh
I could
wow.
think about was you and going back each year and playing dominoes and uh, what that connection has meant over the years.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
can I step further in and back from that at the same time? Like it feels like now we're talking about black manhood in particular, which feels
Yeah.
like, okay, maybe we need to be looking at that as distinct from, let's say, masculinity in general, and let's back that up to where are women in this story?
Yeah.
How do women fit into that picture and fit into the American dream or distinct dreams? Yeah.
Um, I also was, I don't know why this quote popped into my head, but I was thinking about black manhood, and then I was thinking about that Zora Neale Hurston quote in Their Eyes Were Watching God, which is a paraphrase, but black women are the mule of the world.
Mm.
And I was thinking about how, if we talk about like intersectional trauma, that for all the things that happen to black men, black women have those same issues, and then also they have the issues of being a woman. And so I think, you know it's easy for me as a black man to feel attacked, to feel slighted. But when I take a look at, say, what my mother has gone through, or what my aunts have gone through, or what my grandmother has gone through, to really take an objective look at it, I guess tougher for them than it is for me when you add in gender. So I appreciate black women, certainly, and I recognize their struggles as connected, both connected to mine and then distinct from mine, in that there's another level of of uh, of oppression happening for them.
And do you think that, just to go back to the earlier question, do you think that means the dream itself has to be different? Or do you think it means, well, the obstacles are greater to realizing it, but the dream can remain the
Mhm.
same? I mean, you could do that for any group that's running into obstacles. How does that question hit you?
Well, I think, when we think about the dream, the at large dream, we're talking about a family.
Mm,
And so, uh, if we're talking about, you know, solidarity or black uplift, then we're talking about a black family. And for that to happen, both of those members have to achieve their vision of a dream, right? It can't be a separate dream. There's, loads and loads and loads written about what people call a broken black family, right? Like, how many times have we heard that? So I think that the dreams are connected, right? We need each other to achieve the vision of whatever the dream is.
So on the we need each other, I want to anchor us in Portland a little bit. Um, and
Okay.
how much are you in Portland these days? You get back here
uh,
much?
yeah, probably once a month now.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So also in you wrote a piece for Oregon Humanities Magazine in 2013 called What It Means
Yes,
to
I
Say
did.
Portland. And
Yeah.
in that piece, one thing you wrote is what it means to say my city is yes, you dream, but small,
Hmm.
realistic.
Yeah.
Is that still a dream if it's Portland sized?
Man, I want to just to speak on that essay in particular, because that essay was an essay that was expanded for the opening of Survival Map, which is Dear Marcus.
Yeah,
So if you get halfway
yeah.
through Dear Marcus, there's a different version of that essay. And I will say also that uh, that essay was born in one of my classrooms. I had given my students the task of writing. I used to give writing prompts. I still do. And I said, I want you to write about home. I said, here's the prompt. This is what it means to say. And I drew a blank. And I said, fill in where you come from. And they were like, why do we always got to do this? Like, why don't you ever do the prompts with us? And I was like, okay, I'll do the prompt too. And that's how that essay was born, which later became the opening of a book. So I'm thankful for,
Mm.
obstinate students. But the dream small and realistic. Um, I think uh, I can see, like, I just took a look at the homicide statistics for Oregon, and the most recent one that I saw said that it was 69 homicides. The previous record was 70 in 1987. This is a couple weeks ago, so probably we've surpassed even 70 by now. Um, and not all of those obviously are black and brown people, but I think, and also I can't say this for sure because but in the article that I read, there were only 11 arrests in those at the time 69 homicides, right? So they're not even catching people. Um,
Mm.
but I think that for that level of violence, and this is just the homicides we're talking about, not to mention the amount of shootings or other kind of violent acts. To me, that is an indicator of dreaming small, right? Of people who feel trapped, of people who feel like they don't have
Mm.
another outlet for their anger and their angst, of people who feel like they've been slighted, like uh, there are systemic forces against them. So it's like the predictable outgrowth of a certain kind of oppression.
Mm.
So me, that's when I say small and realistic. Like there's the there's the evidence for that assertion.
That violence, especially maybe as directed at one's own community,
Yeah,
is a sign that the aspirations have contracted due to the wider conditions and how they come in.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Do you-
I would
so
say
I'm going to
so.
ask a question. So somehow the talk of violence just made me think about again the Maud Arbery situation, and
Hmm.
it's hard it's hard to read that without feeling overwhelmed by kind of grief, sadness, anger. Is it worth trying to understand what's going on for the perpetrators of violence? Like, is that also a kind of contraction of a dream? What's, do you have a sense of what's going on there? Is that the wrong question
Hmm.
to ask?
I mean, I do think it's worth investigating the circumstances of any perpetrator of crime or harm to another person, understanding the psychology, which is not to dismiss it or to create a an alibi for what they did. I think that if we talk about, well, first of all, we should say that most crime happens with people of the same race, right? So if we talk about black on black crime, we should also be talking about white on white crime. So I think we should have that as a baseline. But I do think there is a particular, it feels like the crime in the Arbery piece was about oppressing a group versus the crimes that happened, let's say, that I was familiar with when I was growing up, felt like the outcome of oppression, right? So
Hmm.
it's like I remember I used to give a an analogy in my classroom. I said if if two people were fighting and the other one subdued the person they were fighting with, and they had their foot on their neck, I was like, had they won the fight? And some people would be like, yeah, and I'm like, well, kind of. But the moment that you let your foot off of the other person's neck, you're back in a fight. And I think that the McMichaels thought their job was to keep a foot on the neck of anyone that they deem less than them, um, which is a different kind of thing than two people who are from an oppressed group committing violent acts against each other.
Hmm. So somehow this is making me think of that moment in Residue Years where Champ is in the professor's office. And the professor says, "You do great in politics." Champ says, "No, no, not for us." Feels like
Yeah,
this has been a very political conversation. Feels like much of your writing is not explicitly about the political process, but is deeply political. So can I like
yeah.
where does the political stand for you?
Uh, the political stands for me and the personal. Um, I I think if we can talk about like the evolution of, well, there was a book called Oversoul before there was Survival Math. I mean, before there was Residue Years, and then there was Survival Math. To me, Survival Math, I mean, the Residue Years feels like a personal examination of the circumstances of my kind of intimate family members. So my mom, my two brothers, and it was an exploration. And it doesn't, you don't travel far in that book. I mean, you might get to Southeast Portland from Northeast, but if you just were to kind of, and I think someone has already done this, like if you mapped out how
Huh.
far any character goes in that book, I mean, it might be like a 30-mile radius. And it also was when my vision of Northeast Portland was much more myopic. I was concerned with the people who I had contact with. And I kind of understood the kind of broader forces, but I didn't really talk about them. I mean, there's a conversation about gentrification in the barbershop, but I don't really talk about that. But then when I wrote Survival Math and really, thinking about the state constitution and the exclusion of Black people in Oregon state constitution, I started to think more broadly about how Oregon became Oregon. And you couldn't do that without also exploring whiteness. So then that took me, it expanded the scope. So Survival Map has a much broader scope than Residue does, and but it's always, to me, if my people aren't at the center of it, then I don't want to do it because I'm not a historian. I'm not a, even though I wrote journal, I'm not a journalist, right? Like I am a writer, and a storyteller. And so to me, and also I'm really only concerned with telling stories about home. Even if you look at the Outbreak piece, there's so much about Oregon in it. Someone asked me like, why did you talk so much about Oregon in the history of running? Well, because it was grounded in Oregon, right? And I had to figure out a way to talk about home. So to me, writing about home, thinking about home is both a personal act, and I cannot talk about the personal without being political because the political shapes the circumstances of the people that I love.
Hmm. That was a beautiful journey, even in that response. like, um, and starting that with the talk of the actual physical geography of residue years, I hadn't thought about that, but when you said it, it really landed right away. That yeah, it's they're not covering a lot of ground.
Yeah.
It's infused with these deep political questions. Um, in survival math, you say, if I remember it right, you say that something like you never had a conversation with your mom about American ideals or patriotism.
Yes. Yeah, that is true. Yeah, political conversations did not happen in my household. My great grandmother was religious, and she would talk to you about morals and as they pertain to the Bible. But we didn't have, and it's strange also because she came from Alabama at the time of the civil rights movement. And she also worked. They were in the pews with Martin Luther King, but she did not have those conversations with me, and my mother has not had those conversations with me. I think they kind of ground their tutelage, parenting in uh, a sense of morality that is
Mm,
obtained from Bible verses and religion, and hope that like it gives you a kind of personal accountability so that you do the right things, and if you mind your own business, then you'll be okay. Because I also
mm.
feel like it's a little bit of pessimism in that the political doesn't necessarily work for us, at least not at a kind of state or national level. That the grassroots political activism is more beneficial for us.
And the grassroots political activism primarily through the church.
I think so, but also, I mean, there's a program, Self Enhancement Incorporated in Oregon, which I love. I
Mm,
went through the pro through the basketball camps, and I work for them summer jobs. And to me, that's a really I never thought of it in this way, but it is actually a political organization because its mission ostensibly is to rescue at-risk youth. But to me, that mission is grounded in kind of healing or helping the black family, which is wholly political, right? Like, how do you do that? The resources, giving them housing, giving them job training, like all of those things, while they might seem like grassroots efforts, are deeply political.
mhm. After you observe in survival math that you hadn't had conversations about politics with your mom, you ask her what's patriotism.
Yes.
Do you remember what she said?
She said, something like, we always think of America uh, the as something like a father figure, but she said,
Mm,
"What if America is like our child that we have to protect?" And I probably butchered that, but the idea was that it wasn't above us, that it was an entity or an idea that we had to protect. And the analogy that she gave is like when your child is wrong, you still defend them or you still stand by them. And
mm,
so people who are nationalists, who know that America is committing these horrible atrocities all over the globe, but still are like, red, white, and blue, and I'm an American through and through. So when she said it, I was like, wow, for someone who hadn't really had those kind of considerations, that seemed a really astute and way to think about America and nationalism and patriotism.
Yeah, it's actually really powerful to hear you say that too. That it's like a child we love and know needs some teaching,
Yeah,
rather than a parent teaching us. If I remember right, that comes up in the section about donating blood.
yeah, American blood.
In Yeah, in which you say that, like, so your mother was donating blood as a source of money.
Yeah,
That's And you say, to bleed true American blood, my mama would have to be white.
yeah,
As you hear that, you're nodding. You feel like, yeah, that that's how it is.
yeah. Well, I was thinking about the research that I'd done about where American blood donations came from, right, during the World War I, and how the guy who's named the father of the blood bank, Dr. Drew, I think his name is, was a black man, a fair skinned black man who could not even donate because they had forbidden black people to donate. So he invented the like plasma system and couldn't even do it himself. Um, so yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
think when we think about like, when the elections come around, they're gonna start talking about the heartland, right? And they have a certain uh, to
Mm.
me, an aesthetic of when I think of the heartland, I think of a certain aesthetic of a voting public, right? And I'm like, well, why is that the heartland? And if we're saying that, we're saying that this is the heart of America, then we're also saying that this is what an American looks like. And
Mm.
so I would argue that um, the closer you get to that as an identity, the more American you are, and the further away you get from that. I mean, who goes and tells a white man go back home? Nobody goes up to a white guy and is like, you need to go back to Ireland. Why don't you
Uh-huh.
go back to Switzerland? You know,
Uh-huh.
no one ever does that,
Well, I
right?
might
Because they
start.
are Americans.
Yeah. Um, the the sort of concrete challenges to even like what counts as blood that is good to donate, acceptable to donate, is
Yeah,
stark. And again, like both deeply sad and deeply enraging evidence for the point you're just making, an understanding of what counts as an American. Um, and it's interesting to think again of what you said, your mother said about think of America as a kid.
yeah.
And so, you, towards the end of Survival Math, you talk about revision. And like, how do you decide revision is what's called for instead of crumpling the thing up and throwing it away?
Oh,
And
so
now I'm
there's
not
a
talking about, yeah, a chapter. I'm talking about a country. Yeah.
yeah. Well, when you say crumple it up and throw it away, it reminded me of a story that my old mentor, a guy named Gordon Lish, I had finished an entire draft of the Residue years, and I sent it to him, and I thought, oh, he's gonna love this thing, and he's gonna tell everybody, and I'll be a millionaire, next week. And he sent me a postcard, and he was like, throw that thing away. It's not a novel.
Mm,
And
mm,
I remember reading that on my couch, and I just sat on my couch and I cried. And I'm not an easy crier, and I just cried and I called him, and I'm like, hey, I got I got your postcard. Did I read what I thought I read? And he was like, yeah, Mitch, you can throw that away. It's not a book. Um, and I resisted that, and he actually, called back later and helped me out. But I think you can't crumple it up uh, because one of the things that he told me, which is, let me back up a little bit, is he said even if you throw it away, what's good there is still in you. And so I think the idea of throwing away the whole system, yeah, we could abolish systems, structures, but I think also what's good there is probably going to remain, hopefully remains. But also, I think the seeds of what is not good there is also going to remain. I was talking to someone the other day about abolishing the police. And I said, yeah, if we abolish the police, like those people still gonna get jobs. So they just gonna be in the bank discriminating in a new type of way, which is a kind of is certainly a pessimistic way to view things. But I do think that you can't just tear a structure down if you don't change the pathologies and the ideologies of the people. And I also believe that whoever invented whiteness was like the genius of all time because it adapts, right? And it's like I don't know how it could be eradicated.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, if I go back, I mean, for me, I'm a white guy. That's the box I
Yeah,
check. But that's
yeah,
because whiteness adapts. Where I come from, I wouldn't have been white not that long ago.
right,
Uh,
yeah.
and um, can I push you a little bit on, like, let's think about Portland for a minute, on what's
Let's
good to keep and what would you revise and cross out and crumple up and throw away? Can I ask a question like that?
yes. What I would keep is its cleanliness. It's like it's such a clean city. Living in New York, you're like, ooh, I don't want to go outside, man. It smells like garbage out here some places. I like that. No, but in seriousness, I think
It's not what just cleanliness is not the first word that people would say about Portland now. The last few years have been tough. Tough. It's been tough.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
Portland
yeah,
feels
yeah, yeah. That's true. That's true. It is. Yes, certainly, certainly, certainly changing or has changed. Um, what would I keep? Um, I would keep Oregon Humanities and Portland Literary Arts because I think we're talking about in public radio because we're talking about ideas and how ideas are disseminated. And if you have people who are coming in contact with ideas that they either are novel to them or challenge them, I think you have a chance for some kind of evolution. I think what happens
hmm,
because Portland is a white majority is that not enough people come in contact with the other,
hmm,
being a person or with ideas. And so I think spaces that we can create where that happens is important. Um, I would keep um ah man, what else would I keep? It's hard for me to imagine what else I'd keep. Well, I'll tell you what I would get rid of. I would get rid of
great.
this pride and weirdness. Because to
Hmm,
me, the weirdness is not actual weirdness, it's code for whiteness. And
hmm,
so I would try to remove all the like when Trump was in office and he used to dog whistle all the time. I would take away all the dog whistles. So if you were a racist or a bigot, your racism and bigotry would be explicit, right? So at least
hmm,
now we know what we're dealing with. You don't call yourself weird no more. Just say you like being around white people. And so now we can have a conversation because or not, but at least I know who you are. So I would
hmm,
do that, and I would really try as much as I can to think about how to address. It's not the violence that we're talking about; it's the circumstances that are producing this kind of violence. So I would go out to the numbers, and I would try to figure out what kind of resources, and not just monetary, but mental health resources, um, all kind of help what needed to be done so that this didn't seem like an option, like a viable option for so many people.
hmm, hmm. What about the hoop? What would you do about the hoop in Portland?
About the basketball,
Yeah.
well, I would it's thriving. I think one of my younger brother's old teammates, a guy named Thomas Gardner, just took over from my good friend Patrick Strickland at Jefferson High School, which is the powerhouse high school for the last decade or two in Oregon. And I think it's going to do well. I mean, Oregon is now consistently, um, players from Oregon are now consistently in the national spotlight. We've had our fair share of pros, so I think that Oregon basketball is thriving. I think I would love to see. It's hard to get an equal amount of enthusiasm for academics, but I would love to see our great young scholars celebrated in the same way that we celebrate our AAU champions and our high school champions, which is, that's a much broader issue that is happening everywhere. But I want it to be cool to come out of Jeff and be a scholar. Like I would love to see that as well.
It's funny because that's where I was going in my head, was thinking back about even that, what it means to say Portland. That piece starts with hoop dreams. That's what you talk about at the beginning of that.
Yeah,
And in survival math. And you said earlier in our conversation this evening that your identity as a basketball player actually helped you not be identified as a Crip.
yeah,
But being a basketball player maybe also meant you weren't identified first and foremost as a writer.
yeah,
So can I,
yeah.
like, I have a good friend here who's actually a soccer player who says there's a lot of talk about how team sports are good for. Can I ask about that? Oh, we're hearing.
Uh,
Are you hearing
uh,
another voice now?
yeah. I heard something.
Okay, we'll try to. Uh, hey, Chris, if you're out there, we can hear you. There we go. That's okay. Thanks. Glad you heard me say that. Welcome.
Yeah.
Mitchell, I was
Can
what I
you, can you
was
say
asking
the
about
question
was
again, please?
character. Sure, I can try. Character and
Mhm,
sports. So it
mhm.
sounds like in your understanding, kind of the dream around being a pro basketball player or a recognized college basketball player, a recognized player of some kind was helpful for you in developing and maybe a step towards uh, certainly avoiding other trajectories that seem worse. Do you
Yeah.
think it would be better to downplay it further and upplay some of the kinds of things that you just talked about? Work at other jobs, being a student, that sort of thing.
I mean, I think it's again, if we're talking about identity, like people want to do things, I think, that they feel others respect or admire. And so that's why it's very easy to choose sports, because you get there's a metric for it, right? Like you can tell whether or not you've done well. There's a system for it, right? Like if you think about, I was reading months ago about the first American sports hero, which was a boxer, and he became a sports hero because he was boxing at the advent of mass media, at the advent of the newspaper. So the ways in which the
Hmm.
newspaper created heroes. And so I can vividly remember playing in my first varsity game at Grant High School in 1991 as a sophomore, and rushing home to pick up the newspaper just to see that I had 2 points in the paper, my last name and 2 points. That was like, it was a big thing for me. And
Yeah.
just that little bit was like something for me to pump my chest about out in the
Hmm.
community. And so, you know, it's hard to obtain that kind of immediate, recognizable adulation and recognition from getting, you know, a 3.5 GPA in school. Like, yeah, if you're a scholar athlete and you become the valedictorian, maybe they'll write a story about you in the school newspaper. If you so happen to be one of those people who get accepted into every Ivy League school, but like now we're talking about the 0.001% versus if I was just
Hmm.
I was a second team all city basketball player. I mean, the kind of recognition that I can reap from that in the community was far beyond what I could have obtained as a student. Which is not to say that I didn't value it, but it just I it
Hmm.
wasn't set up for me to get the love.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to think of how do we shift cultural expectations so that people are getting the love for stuff that uh, it sounds like might be more generally useful or might be useful for more people. Um,
Yeah,
as we move towards closing, I guess um, I want to go back towards the beginning of survival math. You talk about Mitzrayim, um,
yeah,
Egypt, the boon of a chance to become, which seems related to dreaming, this idea of
yeah,
becoming.
yeah.
Seems like you've done a lot of thinking about becoming and a lot of becoming. What do you like? What do you think it takes to become what you hope to become?
Um, I think um, ambition, which is probably code word for hope.
Mm,
So I mean, I'm trying to imagine a person who was not hopeful and yet ambitious. That doesn't seem like that could exist. Um, I also think a recognition of possibilities, right? So the more that you see that's possible for yourself, the greater your ambitions can be. And I also think there was one of the things that I tell my students in class is, it's very helpful for me to point out when you can't write a sentence well, or if you can't create a metaphor well, but it's also important for me to point out your strengths. And so I think that we should also be able to keep track of our strengths, because I think knowing that can also point you in a direction, right? I had professors tell me, or teachers tell me, that they thought I had an aptitude for writing. It wasn't creative writing, but again, I thought about that when it was time to apply for graduate school. Like, maybe what they said was right. Maybe I can do this. So
mm,
recognizing our strengths, I guess you would also have to recognize your weaknesses. Holding on to hope, which is a kind of ambition. And I think also we just can't devalue mentorship. I mean, at every stage in my life, there was someone who was pointing me in the right direction and giving me encouragement. I just attended my old high school. He was my high school counselor and then my junior college basketball coach, a man named Donald Dixon, who retired from Jefferson High School after either 42 or 44 years of service in the
wow.
Portland public school system. And he was the one that told me to apply for a college scholarship that wasn't basketball related at Portland State, which is a scholarship they held for me while I was in prison. So that changed my life. There was, Tony Hobson and Ray Leary, who created Self Enhancement Incorporated when I was young. I think the first camp was 1984. And so gave me a job when I was in high school, um, allowed me to go to camp and stay constructive when I could have been, who knows, wandering, doing what else. Um, there was Gordon Lish when I got out of graduate school and was kind of faltering as a writer in New York. And he would call me late at night and say, I think you can make it. Stick with me, you'll be great. And that encouragement really kept me going. So at every stage, there was someone saying, I think you can do it. And oftentimes, I think that might be all that a person needs.
Mhm. Um, it's beautiful to hear, like remembering your third grade teacher and the one thing she said that helped you. The thinking about basketball coach who actually told you to apply for a non-basketball scholarship. Thinking
Yeah.
about all the individual people who said things. Maybe they're saying things like that to many people over the course of their life, but for you, how it shaped your sense of yourself, the recognition of who you were as an individual. I kind of want to push as a last question back from the individual to the national. Like, how do we
Mm-hmm.
do that not just on the level of an individual, but with a country, with a nation? How do we help the nation revise itself? And maybe I can anchor the question by putting it to you in terms of what you're doing now. How do you see your writing and your teaching of writing figuring into that question?
I can't remember. I think this may have been a commercial or something, but it was a tagline, and the tagline was "Tell kids the truth." And so I think on a national level, what we need is not necessarily mentorship. What we need is a reckoning, and that reckoning is truth telling, right? So, like, it's hard to remain a racist if you have the evidence against racism, against this hierarchical thinking about who's better than who. It's hard to be a bigot when you're presented with the information and these opposing viewpoints, which makes so much sense. So I think on a national level, we need less mentors and more truth sayers, which is also what I hope to be in my own writing, right? Not to say I know best, but to give you a truth and help hope that it pushes up against another truth or belief that you have and that you have to reckon with them.
Hmm. Uh, that's nicely said, and also resonates with my sense of what you're doing on the page all the time. And so, you know, I want to say, I guess, a couple things by way of closing. First, I want to encourage everyone that's been listening, that's interested, to call back in just about 2 minutes through the link that is provided below this screen, so that you can talk to each other about the stuff that Mitchell's been getting us thinking about. I want to thank Roselle for facilitating that. Um, I want to thank you all for joining us. Most of all, Mitchell, I want to say just a huge thank you for the conversation tonight, and especially for all of you that has gone into it, the writing, the life you've been living, the people that are so much a part of you, the Portland that's so much a part of you. Uh, any last thing that you're walking away with from this conversation tonight, or thinking about, that you think it might be good to share here?
I am going to keep thinking about the things that I would keep and the things that I think we should get jettisoned about Portland. That's going to be. I mean, I'll probably end up writing about that, and I think it's useful for all of us to think about, to catalog, like what's working and what isn't working. Clearly, there are some things that aren't working, and I think it's arguable what is working, but I think that we should do that. Obviously leadership is supposed to be doing that, but I think as an individual we can't, as individuals, right, citizens of Oregon, that we should also be thinking about those same things.
All right. We're nearing the end of the 50th year of Oregon Humanities. We're doing a lot of the kind of thinking you're talking about. What's been good? What can we learn from? What can we build on? It is a real honor to have this conversation with you as we move towards the end of our 50th year and the beginning of this year on American dreams, American myths, American hopes. I want to wish you a fine evening in Arizona, and I look forward to being able to have a conversation like this live and in person in Portland before too long.
All right, thank you very much, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mitchell, and thanks everyone for joining. And please do join the next round of this program if you're game. Have a good evening, everybody.